What is up, everyone? It is a really nice Tuesday here, Tuesday, March 11th, and we are in the midst of college basketball conference tournaments, and this is such a fun time of year, honestly. It's kind of like a nice preview into the actual March Madness tournament, and I will sing my love and praises for the first round. That might be one of my favorite events of the whole March Madness tournament. But I'll get into that a little bit later. I kind of want to just start with going through the top 25, some of the major conference brackets, see what some of the matchups are going to look like, and see if there's any dark horse contenders. So, looking at the number one overall seed with Duke, and it's not too surprising at this point. Duke has been a powerhouse all season long, and they have looked pretty stout in all areas, to be honest. Truth be told, I haven't really watched a whole lot of Duke basketball. We don't get a ton of the ACC games here in the Midwest, but I still feel like even after the loss to Alabama, I still feel like Auburn has the potential to be that number one overall. Maybe they're not the number one overall seed. I still feel like they're the number one overall team. And that's been evident by conference play. Auburn and Duke have been playing in way different conferences. And I know Duke has one of the best young players, Cooper Flagg, and not to take away from him or that squad, they're pretty dynamic on Duke. But Auburn has been way more battle tested at this point. Playing in the SEC this season was just an absolute gauntlet. And the fact that Auburn only lost 4 games in total this year, and I'd have to look at their conference record. I'm not exactly sure what Auburn's conference record is off the top of my head, but they beat some absolute tough teams week in and week out. There were some close ones, for sure. Auburn just lost to Alabama at home, which is tough. Senior day, rivalry game, overtime battle, and Alabama just got it done. So Auburn limping into the tournament with 2 back-to-back losses. But again, they still have been proven to be the best team overall throughout the whole year. And when your conference losses are, let's see, number 4 Florida, number 14 Texas A&M, and number 5 Alabama, I mean, I'll give you some grace on that just because you had to play one of the toughest schedules in one of the toughest conferences, maybe in recent memory, definitely recent memory, if not of all time. So Auburn comes in at number 3, Houston number 2. I've seen enough Houston games to really see that they're balanced on all sides of the court. Their defense is elite. Offense is very efficient. They have good 3-point shooters, but their strength is definitely in the paint, from what I gather. And they're just a model of consistency. I think I saw that Houston is making its 6th season in a row with 20 plus wins. And you got to credit Calvin Sampson, Houston's head coach, for just having a model consistent team. Just rounding out the top 5 here. Florida, number 4, Alabama, number 5. Not too surprising. I've actually been able to follow those 2 teams in primetime a good amount. And I was on Florida a little bit earlier in the season, probably halfway through, watching Florida games thinking, okay, this Florida squad has some dark horse potential. And one of my proud bets of the season is Florida to the Final Four at plus 400. That feels pretty good. That's aging pretty well. And Florida's probably one of the hottest teams in the league right now. They beat Auburn already. They beat Alabama. They absolutely bullied them on their home court. Florida's very well rounded. I honestly, thinking about head-to-head matchups with, say, Duke versus Florida in the championship or Final Four, I would feel comfortable taking Florida even as a slight underdog. They have been a fantastic rebounding team. I think I saw that they led the entire country in rebounding, or they're up there at the very top. They have dynamic shooters. They can boat race you if they start to get hot, especially from three. And they can just control every facet of the game. And it's hard to find a team that's going to be able to stop the Gators. They've also been able to win away from home, which is pretty difficult to do. Some teams, like I remember seeing, I think, number 12, Iowa State right now, they have a very poor road record. And that's a bit of a concern, thinking about if you want to play in March Madness, you have to win on the road. If you can't win on the road, it's going to be a struggle early on. Depending on the matchup, I wouldn't be surprised if Iowa State does get knocked out early on. Maybe not the first round, but second round potentially. Matchup depending, of course. Looking at number 6, St. John, I will be honest, I have not seen any St. John's basketball. All I know is that they are crushing it on defense. I did see a little snippet of St. John's Marquette this past weekend, and I was very surprised that the score got as high as it did. 86-84 overtime victory for St. John's. I don't know much about this small school, man, but I don't know. Who's to say that they can't make noise in the tournament? They've actually played a pretty decent conference as well. It's not like they're playing a lot of cupcakes. It's not like they're running through the ACC. No offense, Duke or the ACC. But St. John's has played some pretty good competition. Marquette, Xavier, UConn, Providence can be tricky here and there. They play good teams in that conference, for the most part. It's not quite the SEC, not quite the Big Ten, but St. John's has been battle-tested and won 27 games. I would have to look at their defensive rankings, but they say defense wins championships. I do think you need to have more potency on offense in March. So we'll see, matchup depending, if they could keep up. If they go head-to-head with strong offenses, can St. John's keep up? That's going to be the question. And truthfully, I need to learn more about that squad. Just a couple of other interesting notes. Finding Clemson as the number 10 according to NCAA.com. I think the first Clemson game I saw this season was when they beat Duke at home. I want to say they were 7.5 point underdogs. And they beat Duke, stormed the court, stamped their ticket for the most part, and just became much more nationally recognized. And they deserve the national recognition because Clemson, they're getting hot at the right time. I could see Clemson being a tricky 3 seed that takes down a number 1. They took down Duke. Granted, it was at home, and we'd have to see how they do on the road. But I don't know. It's hard to find a team that Clemson can't match up well with. Beating the number 1 overall team in the country, they finished 2 in the conference because, again, they're behind Duke. But they strike me as a team that could make a pretty dangerous run. So those are just a few reactions. Some of the top teams. It's impossible to go through all of them. So I did want to get into some of the conference brackets here. All right, so just taking a look at some of the early conference championships. We already have a few automatic bids as of the time of filming. So automatic tournament bids, we have Lipscomb, High Point, Drake, SIU Edwardsville, shout out Illinois, Wofford, Omaha, and Troy. Truth be told, I only really know about Drake, one of my good buddies. He's a Drake alum, go Bulldogs. And he was telling me that Drake plays just absolute bully ball. And I could definitely see that being the case. Just taking a look at some of the final scores from some of their matchups. A lot of 50s, lot of 60s, not a whole lot of 70-point games. So it's going to be interesting to see how Drake stacks up in the tournament. Defense, of course, can win championships, but you have to be able to put up points. You have to be able to make contested threes, tough threes. Does Drake have the offense to keep up with some of these bigger programs? I just think if Drake were to match up with, say, Wisconsin or Kentucky, or maybe later on they meet a Florida or Alabama, would Drake be able to keep up offensively? That'd be a tough ask. That would be a very, very tough ask. But just taking a quick look here at the Big Ten tournament, very intimately familiar with the Big Ten due to my alma mater, Purdue, Boiler Up. And I will say Purdue coming in as a 6 seed is not too surprising. It is very painful for sure because Purdue has kind of stumbled over the last 6 weeks. They lost 4 in a row, beat UCLA, beat Rutgers, then lost to Illinois to close out the season. Truth be told, with Purdue, it does make me nervous. Purdue has gotten exposed over and over and over in the paint. For whatever reason, they are just struggling to stop teams inside. And when you get talented, tall teams that can just crash the glass, it is brutal. It really is. I first noticed that when Purdue was playing Michigan State, and Michigan State, I think, had 8 dunks and probably 4 or 5 alley-oops, and it was just painful seeing them get just shattered in the paint. They have the guard play. They have a really good 3-point offense. It can go cold, and if their 3-point game goes cold, they just allow so much in the paint that it is a worry. And one of those issues I know is center Trey Kaufman-Renn. Good player, 100%. I think he's averaging 19 or closer to 20 points per game. One of the problems is Trey gets into foul trouble, has to sit out early in games sometimes. And then we just don't have the depth at center to protect the paint. So matchup depending, and that's why the Big Ten tournament scares me a little bit, is that looking at the early matchup, just starting in Purdue's bracket, might as well go there, is Rutgers USC. Rutgers is a surprisingly talented team, and I would be pretty confident in saying that Rutgers is going to have a pretty clear victory on there. USC just has not been inspiring. Rutgers has a lot of talent. They just haven't been able to put things together for a consistent period of time. Do I think Purdue could beat Rutgers? We just saw it a few weeks ago, but granted that was at home. Tournament's going to be in Indianapolis, so it's going to be like a home game for Purdue Boilermakers. Circling back to the top of the Big Ten, Michigan State, number 1, Maryland, number 2, Michigan, number 3, UCLA, number 4. All of those teams in the top 4 are coming in scorching hot. Michigan State has been on an absolute tear. They 100% deserve the number 1 seed in the Big Ten tournament. And it's been a pleasant surprise. Maryland has been really catching fire. UCLA been catching fire at the end of the season here. And it's pretty good seeing some good Big Ten representation. I guess we could... It's still weird saying UCLA is a Big Ten team. But, you know, that's our conference now. And it's a good historical program, so we can absolutely claim that. Taking a look at the Big Ten tournament, it'd be really easy to say Michigan State is going to win. It's hard to discredit that. I did want to put in a potential dark horse who, if they can manage to eliminate Michigan State, who's to say that they couldn't run the table? And that would be number 8, Oregon. Now, Oregon has been inconsistent, hit and miss. I think there was an adjustment period to getting used to the Big Ten physicality compared to the former Pac-12. But Oregon has a pretty solid resume under their belt. They have beaten, and if I'm not mistaken, might just have to double check that, but I know that early in the season, they beat Alabama in one of the early season tournaments. Who else did they beat? They beat Texas A&M before that, San Diego State, and then at the time, I think Alabama might have been number 3 or 4. But Oregon has had a lot of streakiness and inconsistency. But they have the DNA to slay giants like they've done in the past. As a number 8, is it possible? It's possible, for sure. They go up against number 9 Indiana, which I think is a pretty good matchup for Oregon. The trickiness is going to be if Oregon beats Indiana and advances, they then play Michigan State. Could Oregon beat them in the second round? It's hard to say. But if they do, I don't see who else would be able to stop Oregon. They just need to string together enough consistent games. Can they do that? That's the big question. Another tournament I did want to take a quick look at was the SEC tournament. And again, as I was saying earlier, SEC, the conference as a whole, might be one of the strongest conferences I remember, at least. I mean, you have teams like Oklahoma who had a horrible conference record, and they still might make the tournament just because they played so many close games in the SEC. And it would be worth looking into to see how this conference this year compares to other historical conferences, because this is just completely stacked. I don't know how else to put it. So, just taking a look at the bracket right here. Auburn number 1, makes sense. Florida number 2, Alabama 3, Tennessee 4. It's about as good a top 4 as you're going to find in any conference tournament, let alone even the NCAA tournament. There's a good chance that Auburn and Florida get 2 of the 4 number 1 overall seeds in the tournament. It's possible for Tennessee and technically even Alabama to make it in instead. Following up, we have 5 Texas A&M, 6 Kentucky, 7 Missouri, 8 Ole Miss, 9 Arkansas, 10 is Mississippi State, 11 Georgia, 12 Vanderbilt, 13 Texas, 14 Oklahoma, 15 LSU, and 16 South Carolina. That got a little southern there, which makes sense for the SEC. So it's easy to say, hey, one of those top 4 teams is going to win easily. That is true. It is very well possible that one of the top 4s wins it all. Thinking of, though, who could make a run? That's kind of a tougher one, and I think we might be able to see a run out of Kentucky or maybe even Vanderbilt. Now, Kentucky is a little easier to explain. Blue blood program, they've been there before, they're battle tested, they have a first round bye. So they're going to play either the winner of Oklahoma or Georgia. Both those teams, Oklahoma and Georgia, are fighting for their lives, but they're fighting very inconsistently. Both those teams just struggle to put together decent games back to back to back. That could be an easy cakewalk for Kentucky. Then Kentucky would face number 3, Alabama. Now, Alabama ends on a very strong note, going into Auburn, getting a huge win last game of the season. Does this mean Alabama could be due for a letdown? It's hard to say. Not to mention, the end of Alabama's season was very rocky as well. They played Auburn, they played Tennessee, they played Mississippi State, I want to say, then Florida, then Auburn. So this Alabama team went through the buzzsaw at the end of the year. They did beat number 1 Auburn at Auburn, but gosh, they just been through a lot in the last 2-ish weeks. So could that be a spot for Kentucky to sneak by, face the winner, maybe Missouri, Florida in the later rounds? Possibly. So Kentucky maybe has a path, but again, getting through any of those top teams is going to be a struggle. Now, Vanderbilt, that's a harder one, but we want to get into some depth here. Vanderbilt has as well similarly had a bit of an up and down season, but it's not like they haven't faced and beaten good teams. So Vanderbilt is going to be starting off facing, let's see, they faced Texas in the first round. I don't know. Texas is limping into this tournament. They are on the outside looking in. I just don't think that they have the horses to keep up, to be honest. But Vanderbilt might be able to have a shot here. All they have to do is beat that Texas squad, and then they have to go to play Texas A&M. And Vanderbilt's had some good matchups where they kept things close with tough teams. I saw Vanderbilt beat number 8 Tennessee, and I'm seeing the final score of that 76-75. They could beat decent clubs. Now, will they be able to beat Texas A&M? They've already done it before. They beat number 14 A&M, and I think it was on the road, if I'm not mistaken. So this is going to be an interesting Vanderbilt club. All they have to do is beat Texas A&M, who they've beaten before, and then beat Tennessee, who they've beaten before. There's a familiarity and a path that maybe, if this number 12 team catches fire, they might have a path. Now, they would have to face most likely number 1 Auburn, but if Vanderbilt could string along 3 wins, who's to say they could not sneak into the tournament? Now, just wanted to take a quick peek at the ACC. I will say I'm not overly familiar with a lot of these squads coming out of the ACC. I did see a fair amount of Duke and Clemson games. I'm not too familiar with Wake Forest, Louisville. Those are the top 4 clubs. But I could easily see the ACC tournament ending up being Duke versus Clemson in the final championship game. I just don't know how much I believe in the other squads. North Carolina did catch heat towards the end of the season. Tough loss at Duke on the previous weekend in the final game at home, for that matter. But North Carolina may have a shot. All they would have to do is beat Notre Dame or Pitt, move on to face Wake Forest, and then gonna take a guess and say play Duke after the double bye concludes. So North Carolina could have a shot, try to get revenge. We'll see how that might materialize, but I just really like in the ACC, Clemson Duke, play it out in the final game of the tournament there. So those are kind of the main highlights of some of the bigger conferences. For the Big 12, we do have some interesting matchups here. Truth be told, I did not expect Texas Tech to be the number 2 squad out of the Big 12. That one was a bit shocking. Houston, not much of a doubt. They have been dominant all season long. They are resilient. They find ways to win. And that club, that team could very well go far. Number 3, Arizona. Number 4, BYU, rounding out that top 4. I can't say I've really watched a whole lot of BYU basketball, so I will have to research and look into that. Iowa State, number 5, Kansas 6, Baylor 7, West Virginia 8. Iowa State was kind of locked into that number 2 spot earlier in the year, but I know they had some bad injuries. They just play very streaky. And I mentioned it before, they play very bad on the road. Their road record is not what you would expect out of a top 12 team. So I'm a little iffy on that Iowa State team. Kansas, number 6, they've been so erratic. And on the road, they've been bad. So I just don't know if I believe in any team out of the Big 12 on the lower end. I do feel like if I had to make a dark horse Big 12 pick, it could be Cincinnati, the 13 overall seed. They would have to play Oklahoma State, which I think is very winnable. Then they'd have to play number 5, Iowa State. Again, a very inconsistent and erratic team that doesn't play well on the road. Very talented, sure. But that Iowa State team is not the most consistent. They would then, if Cincinnati were to beat Iowa State, go on to play BYU, which I think that's going to be a matchup of similar styles, I would say, to beat 'em up, punch you in the mouth kind of teams. Shoot, that game could easily be 61-62 as the final score. So there is a bit of a path for Cincinnati. Will they actually make it there? It's kind of hard to say. If they were to beat BYU, they would have to then go play potentially Houston, the number 1 team. And that's just going to be tough for any team. I'd be more than willing to say Houston's probably got the Big 12 locked down. Texas Tech could give them a run for their money. They actually have a very high-end offense on Tech. But we'll see who can actually keep up in a potential Houston-Texas Tech showdown. And so, yeah, that's just an early look and preview at some of the tournaments. And I am... Oh, shoot. As of recording, Cincinnati already beat Oklahoma State. So, all right. We're 1 for 1 on predictions as of now, but I'm prepared to go 0 for 8 on some of those predictions too. But yeah, I'm excited for conference tournaments. It is a great intro, a great preview to the March Madness tournament, and that it might be one of my favorite sporting events of all time, in all honesty. Super Bowl's great, but it's like taking the hype and the intensity of Super Bowl and just dragging it out for a good 3 weeks. So I'm excited. I'm going to watch some of these games. I'll report back later in the week about some of the conferences and how the whole bracket looks. And if you stuck around for this long, thanks for watching. We'll be coming out with more basketball content soon enough.